This is the E-Commerce Edge podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the pod. I'm going to get right down to it here. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Robby Bryant from Marigold to the podcast. And as part of my introduction, I'd like to first of all apologize. I had a conflict of scheduling the last time we tried to record our episode, and you were so generous to say, Jason, go and deal with that conflict that you need to deal with. And here we are back again to actually make this happen this time around. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm happy to be back, of course. And little did you know, actually, I was doing a back-to-back series of podcasts that day. And that was the second, but not the lesser of the two, of course. And we got 5 minutes into it, and you said, actually, I got to go. And inside of me, I thought, this isn't the worst that could happen. I took it, and it was good to have a small break, and it's good to be back.
Thank you so much. Thank God for silver linings in some respect. So now this is amazing. And look, before we get into Marigold, and it's got a bit of a storied history, Marigold, as a platform partner, as someone who plays in the marketing automation and digital marketing space. It's got a storied history of acquisitions and roll-ups and inclusions and sales of platforms and acquisitions of platforms and everything else. It's quite interesting. When I started to look into the background of Marigold, I was like, oh, there's a few names I haven't heard in many years because I've been in this industry for 25 years. But before we get into that, why don't you tell us how you came to be in this space to begin with? Because you've only been with Marigold for 3 years. You've been in product. If I had to put you in a bucket, which is always difficult to do for someone that works in digital, you're a product leader, right? And that's what your specialization is. But how did you get into this space?
It's a transition across disciplines like it always is. You start with what you know, and you use that to like slide over to a little bit of what you don't, you expand into it. My official title is dubious as all things digital. It's like Lifecycle marketing leader. And really what that means is it's a combination of traditional marketing and product-led growth. But to your point, I started my career a long time ago. I told you last week, when we just got started, I was buying basically search keywords for a penny a pop or a couple of cents per bid on Overture way back before Yahoo acquired it. And I actually got really lucky. I got noticed by some folks out in San Francisco. It's a company called Quinn Street. They're actually still public on the NASDAQ. And they put me to work as a media buyer. And we worked with some tools that were custom made in-house, proprietary for like bid management, media management, and optimization. And I thought, this is just the coolest thing. I transitioned into like a 10-year kind of product management SaaS career throughout the 2010s, I guess through the zero interest rate policy period, which was great for funding, not so much anymore. And as that party wound down with COVID, I was working on some portfolio experimentation, doing purely specifically product-led growth. And when I got over to joining Marigold, I took the role because I wanted to exert some influence over both product and marketing, because whenever you work with either of the disciplines and you're exclusive, there's always something else you want. So that's the long story short, but still a little long.
I love that. And I guess also eating your own dog food in terms of, like you said, if the product team is very isolated, there's almost this Chinese wall between product teams and marketing teams of SaaS platforms in particular. There can be a real disconnect between, okay, cool, I now need to get pitched effectively from my product team as a marketer. I need to get pitched by them. I need to be almost sold to by them so that I can go to market and sell these tools and platforms and technologies into the broader market. But if you've worked across both of those disciplines and you unify them under one umbrella, it becomes a heck of a lot easier to know the positioning, the language, the pricing, your go-to-market motion, just everything associated with that as a platform vendor. If you're really deeply tuned in to what the product is and does and the unique value prop it has in the market, it makes it a heck of a lot easier to shout about it from the rooftops, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Are you familiar with the pragmatic marketing spectrum by chance?
No, I am not.
Everybody check that out. Like, I always got thrown into some product training courses and I was pretty cynical, especially in my early 30s. But pragmatic marketing is great. I got certified, and it has this full spectrum that starts with the planning and definition and requirements and understanding the landscape on the product side, then execution through to the middle and the go-to-market, and then the marketing representation side. And really what I was searching for, and as I started to understand that full spectrum, is how can we understand our personal strengths and weaknesses and then our organizational strengths and weaknesses across the spectrum, and then work together to make it happen. Because what happens more often than not, unfortunately, is you get people that are isolated in roles and they know the things to say and or what people want them to say. And then what ends up happening is this sort of this facsimile positioning where it's like copies of copies, where this sounds like it provides value and supports your point, but it doesn't really fully understand, like from the marketing side, hey, why this is actually a great solution for ICPs X, Y, and Z. So whenever you lose that connection, the marketing ceases to be effective. The product doesn't get sold. That's why you need that link.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And for those that haven't heard of Marigold before, I hadn't until we started this conversation offline. I hadn't really heard of Marigold before, but any digital marketer worth their salt that's been in the industry over 10 years will probably have heard of some of the sub brands that you guys have acquired over the years, are rolled together into this unified digital marketing suite. Famously, Cheetah Mail, which became Cheetah Digital, you guys acquired them. You acquired Sale Through, Selligent, Live Clicker, but probably one of the most famous acquisitions that Marigold did was Campaign Monitor, also a pretty famous platform around marketing automation back in the day. And so it feels like there's been this roll up under CM Group, and then, but more recently, literally in the last month, you guys have, I guess, divested is probably the word, part of the enterprise software business. And so to Zeta Global, as I understand it. So help me understand where Marigold sits today in its portfolio of products. And obviously, under the old model before this divestiture, it feels like maybe there was some duplication in the stack. Obviously, we have Campaign Monitor and we have the old Cheetah Mail product, which was long before Clayview ever came along. Cheetah Mail was famous in the marketing automation space. And so it felt like maybe there was a little bit of overlap between some of your tools and technologies. And so how did Marigold set about trying to integrate these systems, technologies, workflows together in a more unified whole that they could go to market with a cohesive message? Because if we broadly try to bucketize these technologies under, say, messaging, loyalty, activation, they're very different, like pieces of tech, right? So on the messaging side, you've got the Cheetah products, Selligent, Sale Through, Loyalty Essentials, Activate, Live Clicker, and mobile. So the reality is that it feels like you were trying to, and I don't know how involved obviously you were in bringing these all under and unifying them under one umbrella, but in order to have a cohesive message that hey, we supply this a la carte suite of tools. You can take them independently or together. How that feels difficult, because obviously they were probably all built on very different underlying technologies when you acquired them. And I don't know whether they've been unified since under one technical roof, but it's hard, right? When you acquire a product and you then try to unify the message to the market of your entire suite of products, including the new acquisitions, that is tough. So was that kind of what you were asked to help deliver to the business when you were hired?
I was hired with an explicit focus on Campaign Monitor itself, and we're still around and kicking and making new product 20 years later. I do have some insight on the Marigold approach and strategy in the recent divestiture, however. And if you think about it, like we were going for a market share play, essentially, right? You have a bunch of number of big enterprise players in the space. You try and buy as much of them and put them under as you can and put them under a single umbrella. And then unify the software essentially as much as possible to accommodate all the strengths of the platforms and push it forward from that angle. And they took that approach with the enterprise business while keeping the commercial separate. Commercial remains just the smaller deal sizes and self-service. And that's comprised of Campaign Monitor and Emma, the Emma email platform, which is actually pretty popular and famous in its own right. We have little mini internal unspoken competitions between me and Campaign Monitor and the Emma team, and their LinkedIn posts always get much more fanfare and engagement. So they're doing something right. But yeah, so they chose to operate where there's a one big umbrella of resources for email marketing businesses split up amongst enterprise and commercial. And then they chose to iterate and build out the platform separately. And they've been working on improving each of the platforms. And in the process of doing so, it seems Zeta took some notice. And essentially one of the strengths of the Marigold empire that we built was that we had a pretty robust European presence. And that's likely what stoked Zeta's interest and why they chose to buy our assets and our folks. And so that process is still happening. I pretty sure I've aligned with anything that's been said in the press release, so I'm not too worried about it. But
And
then
I got
beyond
that
that,
from the press release, so obviously it's out there in the public domain. So hopefully I didn't say anything that wasn't meant to be out there either.
yeah, no, I think it's all pretty straightforward. So for now, we're operating exclusively focused on continuing to build our commercial self-serve and the managed services business. Self-serve being a campaign monitor, and then managed business being with Emma.
But interestingly, on the Marigold website, it doesn't. It still lists Cheetah Digital. It doesn't list Campaign Monitor. So it's a. I'm guessing this is a transitory phase where you're deciding how is the branding going to land. We've got to revamp the website with the Zeta acquisition of some of our enterprise products. We got to get them off of the Marigold website, and they can't. So they're literally going to become two completely separate companies with separate teams and everything else. And you're going to stay on the Marigold team, focused on the Campaign Monitor side of the business.
Mostly, yeah. The timing on that is interesting because we did a brand revamp and reposition on Marigold over the summer. And I know that wasn't the defining thing that caused Zeta to give us a bid unsolicited, but they just completed that. And the reason Campaign Monitor was pulled off the website is because it's an exclusive enterprise focus. In the previous iteration of the website, Emma and Campaign Monitor were featured, and we would get some runoff traffic from the website. But the core intent of the people there are for enterprise solutions with different types of beefed up requirements that Campaign Monitor didn't necessarily support, at least at that price point. So for now, they removed them from the website. But what's going to happen as we move forward, I'm not entirely sure. Are they going to take the Marigold brand and then reposition Campaign Monitor and Emma under it? I don't know. Campaign Monitor and Emma have strong brands by themselves. TBD on that direction. Either way, throughout this, we've been like basically Campaign Monitor by Marigold and Emma by Marigold. So we've got the marquee branding name, but we are still happy to roll up under Marigold.
Right. And your focus primarily in the business today is those two platforms, or is it almost exclusively Campaign Monitor?
I work with both. I would say that lifecycle management leader and execution, like I am over the top of pretty much everything that's happening at Campaign Monitor. I am advisory and execution resources for Emma, but things always change very quickly. Who knows? But I like helping out with both products. It's a challenge in an interesting way because they're very similar, but also slightly different and nuanced.
Yes.
So to come in and pick that apart and tell that story and position it to two distinct different ICPs sometimes is tricky, but we enjoy walking the line.
I love it. Now, I didn't want to spend the entire podcast talking about where you guys are at, but I felt it was important to cover this off,
Sure.
especially if people, as a result of listening to us talk, they go out there and they start Googling or ChatGPTing Marigold and Campaign Monitor and Cheetah Mail and all these other things that, helping people understand what the organization is like today and who they would likely engage with within the organization today. I think that's important to just make sure that it's transparent and clear to the market, which is the reason why I asked those questions. But I think it alludes to, this big change underneath your umbrella of brands, rolling up, then divesting, and maybe getting a little bit clearer on the laser focus on the commercial side versus enterprise software. I think this alludes to a larger both challenge and opportunity across many different categories of what I'll broadly call commerce software. And we saw it across search, merch, and personalization. Those used to be three completely distinct pieces of software and three completely distinct categories of software for that matter. And so we had the independent Nostos of the world, we had independent enterprise search platforms, we had independent personalization platforms, and never the thrice shall meet, so to speak. But now because those three categories of software are so tightly interlinked in terms of what they do and the data that they need to do it well, we've now started to see some roll-ups in that space too. And so we've seen maybe what was originally just an enterprise search platform get into merchandising and personalization because they have to cross-pollinate data to do those functions well. Or we've seen Nosto acquire an enterprise search platform, for example, and they were fairly and squarely dedicated to personalization historically. That's what they focused on, right? Product recommendations primarily. And so we've seen that kind of aggregation of technologies under one roof already happen in search, merchant, personalization. We've also started to see it happen in the full lifestyle marketing spectrum. Famously, If we look at Yotpo, who started out really just as a review, basically just a UGC platform, basically ratings and reviews. That's what they started out as, nothing more than that. Then they expanded into email, retracted that because they said, we don't want to specialize in that. So they pulled their horns back in on that. But then they got into enterprise loyalty, acquired a loyalty platform, have rolled that into under the core umbrella because they realize that the cross-pollination of customer data is absolutely mission critical to what their marketers using their technology are trying to do. And so we've seen this amalgamation of different categories of software happening forever in the commerce world where it makes logical sense to do. So it feels like you guys have gone down a similar path in saying, okay, if we really want to be the lifestyle marketing people and experts, then we got to have technologies that cover every phase of the customer life cycle with a brand. And that feels like something that was a priority to you guys. Am I directionally correct on that?
I would say so. We're definitely trying to figure out and are working on what the next iteration of a modern email platform is going to look like, right? And you can we can throw a couple of bones to our competitors right off who've done it right. Everything you just described, MailChimp is dominant in the email marketing space simply because of integrations. All right. I don't know of any of competitors that have a good social integration, or everyone has some form of web builder, but nothing that's particularly great. But CRM, like Active Campaign, I can't think of a more natural alignment for email marketing, segmentation, and so on than that. So yeah, integration, Klaviyo, e-commerce, CRM, they all go together. And we, and collectively everyone in the email marketing space, are trying to figure out what pieces of that own puzzle are going to make sense. And we're actually actively working on putting some of those together and architecting our own take on what we would call owned architecture and execution.
I like that. I like that. And we couldn't go through this entire podcast without talking more about AI. It's disrupting. It's basically, unless you've got AI in your name these days, it's difficult to go and get funding. There's talk of it being a bubble because it's gotten so much attention over the last 2.5, 3 years that almost to the exclusion of all other technology in the market. The hyperscalers spending billions, edging into trillions over the next decade. When we talk about the major vendors of software, they are all doubling, tripling, quadrupling down. Famously, Salesforce getting into Agentforce, and a lot of this stuff, for lack of a better term, because I've been in this game for 25 plus years now, it smacks of vaporware, to be perfectly honest with you. This feels, okay, cool, we're going to set this vision and we're going to paint this picture, but we're actually going to build towards it over the next 5 to 10 years, right? So we've got this vision, we're going to paint the picture, we're going to sell the vision to the market, and then we're going to try to come behind and clean up and try to deliver on that vision. Because today, there's a lot of technologies that say they are AI first or AI driven or AI at their core, when in actuality, there's a lot of stuff that when you get under the hood, there's not a lot of AI there. Maybe there's a little bit of machine learning, maybe there's a little bit of algorithmic stuff, but in terms of true vectorization and all that sort of stuff, there's just not a lot of true AI under the hood, or they're just a wrapper or skin for other major providers like OpenAI, et cetera, and they're wrapping their technology on top of what is existing out there in the market. And so I'd love your take on your internal view on, first of all, what are you guys using internally in terms of AI tooling to help maybe make your development more efficient, faster, more scalable, all those sorts of things. And then externally, what is the language that you're starting to use, and what AI tooling are you starting to build into your platforms that then is merchant facing, where they can pick up and run with that and say, this is adding genuine value to our business? Because I just think that it's so difficult today because the industry is moving so fast. It's really difficult to separate hype from reality.
Wow. I'm going to have a tough time unpacking and delivering on that, but I'm going to do my best. So let me start out with what I would say is like the false premise of AI. And there's an expectation that it's going to reach like anywhere close to 100% accuracy. And when you build a house on bricks that are 80% correct, it's going to crumble, and it's a weak metaphor. But let me take you back to MarTech and AdTech 10, 15 years ago to give you a good metaphorical example. All right. Love this one. So I actually used to work a lot on device graphs. Okay. And while there are some deterministic device graphs of nodes and edges, most of them are what? They are
Yes.
probabilistic. And they're using signals from the browser and timestamps and geographic locations and pages to come up with the best guess that you are this person. And what do they all say? Even our B2B says I'm like 70 to 80% accurate, and it's nowhere. There's a free version. Go test it for yourself. But even those that you pay a lot for, arguably our B2B is at least priced correctly. But there's some really expensive device graphs out there that will still only get you to 70, 80%. And you always walk away with an each time of probably. And what's the missing link there? And it's context. It's this continual evolving availability of context loops that humans are always going to get and that machines are going to get better at receiving, but they still haven't. If you continue down that metaphorical triangulation with the device graph, how do people talk about device graphs? They talk about them in terms of coverage. What type of coverage does a device graph get you? And I've got like a 70, 80% reliability rate. And the same comes true when you ask AI pretty much anything. All right. So let's just say there is probably 10 to 20% availability of coverage that something is never going to have. And then there's also a 10% screw up rate automatically just baked into the AI if it doesn't have enough context capacity or just simply burps.
Yes. Thus
You're always,
hallucination.
yeah, I'm sorry. What was that?
Thus hallucination at scale.
Thus hallucination at scale. Exactly. And every time when you're trying to bang something out and build 70% on top of 80% and whatever, like none of that will ever really pan out. You need someone to come in and understand how to connect the dots to get it as close to 100%. And even humans, we don't do that. We come in and we do the same thing.
Yeah.
But we just have this ongoing context loop. So I would say, I can't lie and say I know what these big companies investing in AI are doing, but in terms of making these types of coverage and the technology and tool sets available, I think there's demand for it. I just don't think it's ever going to materialize into what they're calling AGI. I think that I've never seen anything that would make me believe that's even remotely close to happening.
Yeah, and
So,
I think that falls in line with my personal experience with AI. And I use it every single day. So a year ago, I redirected all my browser queries directly to ChatGPT. So I haven't done a regular Google search, and I can't remember the last time I did a regular Google search. And I routinely use Grok, and I routinely use Gemini and various other tools and technologies. And then I'm using software that already has a healthy dose of AI capabilities built within it, Descript and a whole bunch of other software that without AI, it would be almost impossible for them to do what they do at any scale and speed. And I'm still and we're already starting to see it in my world, in the B2B e-commerce world. We're seeing AI sales agents come into this world at a great rate of knots, to the point where I see AI being adopted. Oddly, normally retail e-commerce leads the way from a tech adoption perspective versus B2B, and B2B typically lags 5 to 10 years behind. This AI thing is being adopted at scale in B2B to bring efficiencies to the sales process, the B2B sales process, unlike anything I've ever seen before in the history of B2B e-commerce. So I am not going to here to poo AI, but the more that I use AI and the more that my clients use AI, the less worried I become about my job. Meaning that it is a massive help for someone who is already a domain expert, who knows the contextual questions to ask and knows which answers to question. And so the thing that I like to say is, look, if you're already a domain expert and you've already been doing something for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, you know when a hallucination comes back at you and you just go, it just feels off. You're going, no, this is wrong. Or when you ask it for a reference for something it's given to you as absolute fact, and you say, give me the reference link to that. And it can't do that because it was completely made up of a composition of ideas across the internet. And the other thing I tell my clients, and I'd love your take on this, the other thing I tell my clients is the quality of the content, information, logic, books, music, absolutely everything in the world that is creative in nature has varying quality levels. And some of it is subjective, right? So in other words, you go out across the internet and some of the articles you read on the internet are absolute rubbish. And some of the articles that you read from, say, a physicist who's been a physicist for 20 years, you go, wow, this is mind-blowingly amazing, good. Half of it's over my head because it's that good. And everything in between. So there's a spectrum of quality of information across the internet. And so how could we reasonably expect, if all the major large language models are trained on that corpus of data across the internet of wildly varying quality, why would we not expect that the results that we get from the LLMs are of wildly varying quality? So it's a classic case of garbage in, garbage out. It's not always garbage in, but a percentage of it is. And so I think that anybody that has expectations that AI is suddenly going to become a genius overnight when it's been trained on a wildly varying corpus of data, I think it's a fool's errand to think that.
And you have to keep the relativity of the discipline in mind when you're talking about it. So you started this with a sales agent for B2B as an example. And why did those work so well comparatively to other disciplines? It's because the amount of context that they need to have can be defined pretty adequately in 5 to 10 pages. And the percentage probability chance that someone's going to hit a question outside of that scope is very nil. So you can deploy them pretty readily and not worry about it. So yeah, absolutely.
And how do you think that is going to continue to affect your work? Because oftentimes we define marketing automation in the B2C and D2C world as wisdom of the crowd, meaning that, okay, cool. If 99 out of 100 customers who visit our website after visiting this page, they go to this page, they go to this page, and they buy these 3 items, then we've got a pretty good idea that these 3 items should be recommended together. Or if I'm on a page of one of these items, I should probably recommend the other 2. That there is some with a massive volume of data, wisdom of the crowd type of recommendations and type of personalization can be really valuable. In the B2B world, personalization takes a totally different form because we know who the customer is, right? They're never a guest. They're always authenticated. We know what they buy. We know we typically have 5, 10, 15-year relationships with them. They oftentimes have custom catalogs. They oftentimes have custom price lists. They've got custom everything in our engagement with them. And so therefore, it is very much one-to-one level personalization as opposed to the wisdom of the crowd personalization that is prevalent in B2C and D2C. And so it feels like never the twain shall meet, but I now am starting to see B2C and D2C learn some valuable lessons from B2B and vice versa. So, you are very clearly working at the intersection of retail marketing automation, meaning B2C and D2C brands almost exclusively, right? So how do you, and part of that is because in the B2C and D2C world, we are personalizing for a single individual, not for an account. In the B2B world, we're selling to an account that may have 50 buyers sitting underneath that account. And so it becomes difficult to personalize at scale when you're doing account-based personalization in B2B, where you are doing person-based personalization in B2C, D2C. And because you work primarily in the retail sphere, or I assume that you do, what do you think you and that world can learn from B2B that is valuable?
I don't think we have enough time here today. There's things that we can learn, and it's a lot to be envious over with your deterministic one-to-one. Obviously, you want to try to lean into segmentation, personalization as much as possible, right? Like the whole underlying tenet of deliverability is like you're sending something of value to the right person, they want to open it. Segmenting, personalizing goes a long way towards meeting those requirements. But I think there's a good segue to help answer your question, what we learn. And it's talking to you a little bit about how we are trying to use AI in meaningful ways with Campaign Monitor. And you mentioned some examples of how you use AI. And I think when everybody talked about where it fit into email marketing, I think the original idea and thought was, and it probably still is, it's going to be doing a lot of the writing for us. And it's doing some of the writing, but again, you want to proofread the writing and only 80% of it's going to be correct, except for RAA, of course, which is nearly 100%. But that being said, what it's better suited towards is extracting and extrapolating the larger patterns. So we have a new functionality that we just released. It's called Marketing Monitor. And what it does is it allows you to set objectives for your campaigns that you're launching. And the objectives are basically improve my open rate or improve my click-through rate or click-out rate rather. And what it does is it's looking at the aggregate data set in your account historically for signals that add up to more open rates or more click-out rates. And then it makes these suggestions to you so you can implement them. And then it goes a step further and we have industry data sets and it gives you benchmarks for those click-out rates, for those open rates. So now you've got like real world context to understand that you're operating in like a sphere of reality and you've got suggestions on making it better. That's one. We've got one more good one that's worth bringing it up and it goes in line with your personalization example. That's natural language segmentation. If you think about how segmentation happens today, you have to do it. You have no choice. But it's like filtering by attributes. It's cumbersome. Now, type in people that have ordered something of X value over Y months, automatically roll them up to a list. Realistically, you're still probably going to get 85, 87%, but then you only have to go find that remaining 10%. And the coverage that's enabled by it, very practical, very expeditious. So that's how we're trying to lean into AI implementation for email marketing.
And it's interesting because in that same vein, I'm seeing a massive upheaval in the PIM space, product information management, where today people have an expectation of, and largely borne out because of usage of things like ChatGPT. There used to be an upload a 100-page PDF to ChatGPT and saying, find me this piece of information out of that 100 pages, or where does it talk about this, or does it have this information in it? And it can tell you, it used to be that with a PDF, a 100-page PDF, if I had a research report that was a 100-page PDF and I wanted to find a specific piece of information, I'd have to open up an Acrobat, I'd have to do Control F, I'd have to try to find a keyword in the document that related to that piece of information, then I have to scroll to that page, then I'd have to try to say, okay, is this the information I really want? And then in order to try to create a summary of that 100-page PDF, very difficult, right? Really, you'd have to read and digest the whole 100 pages, then you'd have to write your own summary. Now with AI, multimodal AI particularly, whether it's a CSV, whether it's a PDF, whether it's an image, doesn't really matter what the format of data is, it can pull meaningful information out of this type of data, this raw, unstructured data, right? It can give structure pretty rapidly to unstructured data. But what we're seeing in the PIM world is that AI is being used to structure data, get it into a PIM system, then map it into a second structure in our e-commerce websites through a mapping model. Whereas I see a future for PIM where we're not too far away of having just a gigantic S3 bucket with every kind of piece of data you can imagine, from images to CSVs to PDFs to plain text files and everything else, and maybe even spec sheets and exploded drawings and everything else that then has been indexed via AI, right? It's been all vectorized, and we can directly ask questions of that data without it being pre-structured. And so because ChatGPT does a great job with unstructured data and bringing structure to it, so I feel like we're not that far away from those intermediate steps no longer being required in the PIM DAM world. And I wonder if we're going to get to that place pretty soon with marketing automation and full lifecycle marketing, in the sense that today we try to apply profile attributes against a customer based on one of two things: either behavioral attributes that we pick up from their behavior and we apply those attributes to their profile so that we can then segment them, or we have them go through some sort of quiz commerce type of a process on our website, where if a woman goes to a hair care website, for example, we might be asking her, what's the texture of your hair? What's the natural color of your hair? How old are you? All these different things. We ask them a bunch of questions that then once we apply that information to their profile, then it makes it easier for us to segment and recommend products that are appropriate for them. But again, like the PIM example I gave, there's a whole lot of intermediate work that has to happen there, where we enrich a profile before we can segment it. And I wonder if we can get to a place in the not too distant future where that enrichment phase doesn't actually have to happen, because the AI will pick up all those attributes dynamically purely through their behavior. And I wonder how far we are away from that.
That's a beautiful dream. And I'm not, it sounds practical. I just don't feel like it's a today thing.
Yes.
And even if it's a next year thing, I'd still be wary of it.
Yes.
Because I see AI screw up with structured data even still all the time. You ask me one of the ways I use AI that's maybe a little less conventional, but still conventional enough. I use Mistral labeling pipelines. So I'll scrape the web, I'll take our own resources, and what I'll do is I'll put them into SQLite databases, essentially on my desktop, and then I'll run makeshift like marketing OSs in Python that ping that, and I'm like running like top-down regression analyses, or I'm generating content, or I'm like thinking about proposing a larger scale media plan. But I've got everything I need in there. And even with the most tightly organized structures, we still get outputs that need to be improved, whether I'm like having Mistral read that database or I'm having Claude read that database. And there's obviously a huge variance in muscle there between the two. The one is free and comparable, like good enough sometimes.
Yes.
So all that said, I think we'll get there. It feels further away than a year. It feels like a 3 to 4 year thing if I were taking my best guess.
Yeah, and look, I would agree with you based on my recent I'm building apps in Lovable now, and I'm not a coder's behind. And so it's awesome for someone like me who's a highly technical non-developer to be able to be building things that I want to see in the world, or at least I want to use in my own business or in my own personal life, to be able to build things without needing to have and at least get from 0 to 1. I probably can't get from 1 to 100, but I can at least get from 0 to 1. I can get a proof of concept up and running very quickly. I'm creating a full RAG pipeline on my own content, my own YouTube channel, so that I can vectorize all that data and I can slap a chat. I can basically train it on all my data and then I can query it using a chat interface. And I want to create all this stuff that I just don't see in the world yet. And so I think that these vibe coding tools are amazing for that and enabling that. But the amount of rework and re-prompting and re-verification of things that I have to do is almost nauseating. And I think, wow, okay, cool. This has enabled something fantastical, but it is also equal parts infuriating if you are a technically structured person who's a really good BA, a really good solution architect, but you're a non-developer. And so you understand the full software development pipeline and lifecycle. Fighting through that with a vibe coding platform sometimes feels like an exercise in futility of getting where you ultimately want to be. So there is this push-pull mechanism where I think we're, even for a vibe coding platform like Lovable, I think we're probably 2, 3, 4 years away before someone non-technical, and I'm very technical, so I understand database structures, and I understand auth protocols, and I understand setting up API keys and doing API calls, and all. I understand that stuff at a pretty granular level, and so therefore, getting around the foibles of these platforms is probably a little bit easier to navigate for someone like me than someone like my wife, who's just not, she's non-technical, right? So I think we're probably 3, 4 years away from someone non-technical being able to produce software of good quality. And I feel like what you're saying is we're probably at the same stage with lifecycle marketing. You still need to understand the
Metaphor, yeah.
fundamentals of lifecycle marketing, what that means in the real world of human beings, as opposed to the theoretical world of the machines. And you need to be able to have a done with you process, not a done for you process, because a done for you process where it's all black box, it feels like that's going to lead to some bad outcomes.
Oh, yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I would even, I can't give you the top specific of the scale, but I can guess here. You're talking about like non-technical people implementing code, right? What are the barriers? Obviously, setting up the environment to execute it, but also just the density of code and the complexity. So you get a non-technical person, ask ChatGPT for something. They can probably run a 1 to 200 line piece of code.
Yes.
ChatGPT itself starts to crap out around 500, 600 lines. 2 steps forward, or rather 1 step forward, 2 steps back after that point. It will go further.
Yes.
Claude, 1,200 lines of code. And then beyond that, if you start employing tricks where you've got like the markdown files and the breadcrumbs to pass between threads, you can get it up to around 5,000 lines of code. If you as a human can help like
Structure it.
the AI keep the context, that's about the top of MVP vibe coding, I would say, that we're capable of right now. And it takes a highly technical person. I assume, because I've never been a developer, like 10,000 is probably still way too low. I imagine most apps probably have 20, 30,000, 100,000 lines of code. We're still well a ways away from even being close.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm guessing your mission in life is to give lifecycle marketers superpowers, right? That's like your goal. That's your reason for being as a platform vendor, as a person who works in the space, as an educator, as someone who's trying to sell software to somebody who maybe is a little more novice in the way that they've approached. Maybe they're new to the industry. Maybe they've only been in the industry a couple of years. I'm guessing that it's a constant struggle for balance between how can we give lifecycle marketers superpowers, but how can we still make sure we're leveraging human level intelligence to augment the superpowers we're giving them? And it's a fine line, right? Like, how much do we want to own versus how much do we want the humans to own?
Yeah. And even what do we want to be known for as a brand, right? If you think about the niches that all of the brands collectively have carved out on this landscape, I would say we're probably identified for being fast, pretty, and associated with deliverability. That's not deep in the technical weeds. So our sweet spot tends to be people who are more business focused and less tech savvy, but we still want to add some of these AI functionalities and to expand the purview of what they can do. And as you say, give them superpowers. So to that end, that's why with Marketing Monitor, it's meant to be goal-based and to give suggestions in a snackable, consumable way. And then the natural language segmentation, that's just a no-brainer, like easy add-on implementation of AI. So we're looking for those easy, no-nonsense plugins where it just automatically makes sense so that we don't upset the vibe of our current customers
Eh,
and hopefully attract new ones.
Yeah, of course. And how do you think of do you think of competitors at all? Some people are of two minds around this, especially product people. Sometimes they're like, we really need to have our finger on the pulse of the competitive landscape to make sure we're not falling behind, we're not getting too far ahead in our messaging, but yet we want to make sure that we're sitting at the right tables and being at the right consideration set. Short list of if there's two or three competitors out there, we want to make sure we're at the right tables, that we're not at the same table as a platform that's light years ahead of us in terms of the enterprise scale, but also isn't maybe too far down the SMB space to where it doesn't make sense for us to be in the same room. And so when you think about the rooms you'd like to be in as a platform vendor, is it in the Klaviyo end of town, or is it in more the full CDP, heavy duty enterprise CDP end of town, or is it somewhere in between those two?
I would say currently we would probably place more in the Klaviyo constant contact kind of spectrum.
Yep.
We're pushing into the more holistic owned management space over the coming months and years. So that's definitely the plan. But right now we're in email marketing. So it's what we do best. It's what we're known for in terms of just getting up and running quickly with Campaign Monitor and sending out beautiful looking emails. You're not going to find a faster solution. So that's what we bet on.
And what I've found is that, again, going back to this consolidation of product categories, we're seeing a lot of CDP, what were historically just standalone CDP platforms that had to have some form of an integration with a Klaviyo or a Campaign Monitor, or some kind of email management platform. Then, so what we've seen is we've seen the CDPs start to add email capabilities of their own so that they're not reliant on those integrations with platforms like yours. But then equivalently, we've seen platforms like Klaviyo and Dot Digital and all sorts of other pure, or what we would have historically considered purely marketing automation platforms, starting to edge more and more into maybe CRM territory or CDP territory, where they can do more of the lifestyle marketing piece, and they can do more of the omni marketing piece, because they realize that in order to continue to differentiate, we have to continue to expand our platform's reach. And so it feels like those three categories of software in particular, CDP, CRM, marketing automation, it feels like they're growing outwards towards each other every day.
They're going to continue to merge and overlap. A lot of the functionalities are similar, but I think at the end of the day, it's a pretty simple story. Whatever you happen to do well will be what shines through and the reason that people come to you. You ask, do you think about your competitors? Of course, because like on the general, like there are two sides to growth, right? There's the competitive market where people are searching actively for an email marketing solution. And then there's those not in market who need email marketing and just don't know it yet. And that's everybody. But whenever you're dealing with the first scenario, obviously you've got a feature landscape to contend with. You've got a value proposition and price point to be competitive against. So in that context, absolutely on the general market, we need to understand where we are as a baseline so that we're competitive and we can compete. That being said, there are other places where they're less competitive, where people are just coming up to speed. They're not the ones that need to understand the technical depths of the solution. They need to understand, I can send something that's easy and automated. And you have to play both sides. And in the second case, no one's going to care about who you are or who your competitors are. They just want to know that you fit them as like a creative archetype.
Makes complete sense. And if you had to stick a finger in there, you probably don't know the stat off the top of your head. And even if you did, you may not want to share it due to commercial sensitivities. But if you were to break down your target ICP or even your existing customer base, how many of those would be e-commerce businesses versus other, maybe there's professional services businesses, or I don't know, maybe it's dentists, maybe it's lawyers, maybe it's whatever it might be. What percentage of your business today is composed of pure e-commerce businesses that really want to do really good email marketing at scale to their customers versus other verticals or types of businesses?
I see. It's a great question and it's hard, though I do have a decent answer, I think. And the reason it's hard is because Campaign Monitor has been around a long time, and the sample size that you're asking about is massive,
Yeah.
and it's well distributed. I have done like ICP analyses literally sat down entrenched in a seat for 11 hours only to come back with, I can't find a clear direction because of the distribution. But to your immediate answer, like probably about 8 or 9% of our total base as e-commerce or retail, which is actually still pretty large
Right.
because there are only a few like industry segments specifically that actually tally higher. But I would say I've started to think about different lately and more recently, just again, I'll use the words again, creative archetypes, because when you talk about email marketing and you talk about digital services, whenever you try and refine it to a particular industry, you're really like, you're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table because you aren't necessarily interested in a particular industry. You're interested in a person who fits a particular set of use cases. And it's probably industry agnostic, which oftentimes for email it is. So our ICP pursuit, I would say, over the coming months and year is going to be focused more in that direction, further buoyed by the reality that like privacy constraints are probably going to make deterministic targeting even harder as we go forward. So it just seems pretty practical.
Yeah. And how do you guys think about B2B? Because that's the world I live in every day. That's the world I play in. For the last 10 years, I've had a massive focus on it because there is no good that I'm aware of. There is no good marketing automation platform out there today for B2B. It doesn't exist. There's a lot of custom stuff out there, and there's a lot of CRM-based stuff out there, but there's not a single marketing, like mainstream marketing automation platform that one of us would have heard of that is targeted specifically at the B2B world. And I've often wondered why that it is. And is it because of the complexity of that world and the complexity of trying to market to an account versus a single individual human? Why do you think that is? And do you think that's a market opportunity for you?
Gosh, I'd hope it's a market opportunity for me. I would say you can go back to AI, right? Whenever you require more specificity and rigidity out of your answer, I can make a video on VO. And if I have a really tight set of requirements and I go through 4 generations, I'm probably going to be disappointed.
Yep.
But if I relax myself in what I'm open to,
Yep.
and I roll with what comes out of it, then at the end result, I'll probably end up being much more happy with.
That's true.
I would just try to relax constraints in general.
Yeah. And maybe what we do is we have to have simply email domain linkage. And that becomes the linkage on the account. We have to understand that in some instances, those buyers won't always use the exact same domain. There might be multiple domains underneath that company. And so therefore that domain level targeting for email addresses may not be granular enough to do the things we want to do, but it's as good as we're going to get maybe in the B2B world for the foreseeable future.
Sure. And by the way, just to finish up, when I was talking about relaxing those constraints, it's just because whenever you're expecting to hit one person with that perfect level of specificity, 100% all the way down, versus a more broad, like generalized targeting mechanism, this kind of adds up to something that's true versus you went to college at Dartmouth in 1999.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that is very specific and won't always hold up. So I would imagine even you use the word, I have nauseated myself with AI vibe coding.
Yes.
All right. And I'm sure that there might have been a moment where you've tried to get that specific answer, that retort out of AI,
Yep.
probably for 3 hours and you finally gave up.
Yes.
And sometimes you're just not going to get it. And so whenever you're so one-to-one, like for this potential like idea that you're proposing, I imagine most people don't pursue it because the tech isn't flexible enough, or rather the tech is too flexible. It doesn't get the specificity that's required, and it may not for a while.
Yeah. And I think, for example, and look, I'm not a specialist email marketer, lifecycle marketer. I don't do marketing consulting. So but what the complaints that I hear from my clients, manufacturers and distributors, when I'm going in and I'm starting to talk tech around commerce, and it's usually, hey, we're talking about e-commerce platforms, we're talking about PIMs, we're talking about CDPs, we're talking about the heavy duty back office tech. Sometimes we're talking about ERPs. Sometimes we're talking about CRMs, really heavy duty back office technologies usually is what we're talking about. But one of the complaints I do hear about the life cycle, or then they might not even call it life cycle marketing, but I would call it life cycle marketing. When they're saying, look, we really struggle to do any kind of email marketing at scale because we have to rely on our account managers to send targeted emails to their customers based on what they know about that customer and what that customer can buy through us. And by that, I mean, it's very common, especially in the distribution world, to have restricted catalogs, meaning this customer can buy SKUs ABC, this customer can buy SKUs XYZ, and they should not be able to see each other's products, and they have unique prices. And so if we wanted to do batch and blast type email marketing where we had product recommendations, we wouldn't be able to do that unless we could very clearly restrict which products are being recommended to which customers. And obviously in the retail world, that's not the case. Sure, maybe we're trying to send female product recommendations to females and male product recommendations to males, and maybe that's part of the segmentation that we do. But in the B2B world, there are such tight restrictions on what we can market and to who and for what reason that it feels like B2C and D2C focused platforms really struggle with that.
Sure. I'm not entirely sure how to add on to that. Why do you think they struggle with that so much? I guess I would ask.
I guess it's because most of the platforms that they've tried to do this with have not been able to get sufficient granularity of what they're recommending, even the content that they're putting out, in order to conform to the account-based rules that they have applied to that customer. Whereas if they rely on their account managers to send the emails from their Gmail box, and they're handcrafting literally every single email that goes to their portfolio of customers, then at least if something goes horribly wrong in that, then they can pin it back on an account manager who sent the wrong product recommendation to a customer that shouldn't even see it.
Yeah. I'll tell you this, and I'll preface it by saying I'm not afraid and I'm not biased. I don't think AI is ever going to get there. I'm not telling you. I'm telling you. I've sat around giving myself headaches, giving it a verbatim snippet. Give me that verbatim snippet back. And then you work in like to an iterative production cycle and you start feeding it your project new things, new inputs, you get different outputs. And inevitably, you will never get consistent, reliable output to the tune of 100%. That's why I said coverage at the top of this conversation.
Yes.
You'll never get freestanding agents sending out emails with any level of precision that make you feel good about it. You're going to need a human and you'll never get away from it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I really like to say I disagree because I'm
That's a dangerous proposition these days. Like no one wants to think we're going to stick around, but I have not seen, and why? Like with what level of faith have we seen them perform perfectly? I think it's just fear that makes us think, yeah, we're doomed, but put them to the test.
Yeah, and humans are imperfect too, but we just perform imperfectly in different ways. And so
And we've got that continual context loop to improve and realize we screwed up.
yes, if we're selling to somebody and we get a bad result, geez, we probably won't do that again. Yeah, it's the whole get your fingers burned on the stove thing, right? As your kid, you might touch the hot stove once, but you ain't going to do it again. And so we have a really instantaneous feedback loop built into our brains. And so it's a really good thing. Listen, this has been a fantastic conversation. And as we come down to the end of our time together, I'd like to ask you a question that I've been starting to ask for the last few podcast episodes, which is if you could change one thing about our industry or your industry specifically, if you could snap your fingers and change one thing about your industry to improve it, what would that be?
Gosh, that is a tough question. Snap my fingers and improve one thing about our industry.
Yeah.
For starters, I guess I wish there would be more of a randomized distribution of the new AI search results coming out of Google's Gemini outputs, right? Because what you're seeing is a massive upheaval of the existing order. And it's a little scary, right? I'm not saying it shouldn't happen, but the speed at which it's happening, right? You have basically winner take all scenarios. Historically, you had search results distributed against 20, 30 players in a space. Now Gemini is only servicing the top 3.
Yes.
Clickouts are staying on the search platform. So if I were going to change something that was moving in the industry, I would say I would probably randomize the distribution of those winner take all 3 results and test them a little bit more frequently just to load this upheaval that we're about to like barrel towards and through.
I agree with that, but as someone who comes up in the top 3 in ChatGPT for everything related to my industry, maybe and consistently has for the last like year.
What are your take?
Yeah, if you're one of the winners, then it's life is good. But no, to your point, I couldn't agree with you more. And there's a lot of people in our industry that are very good at what they do and are direct competitors of mine, and they just don't turn up because they haven't gone through the effort of making sure that their content is visible to these large language models. And it's a real problem. It's a real problem. And if you're not a self-promoter like me, like I'm very happy to self-promote. And I long since got over a decade ago when I started creating content at scale, I long since got over the concerned that people might think I'm bragging or flying my own flag or being a little bit too self-promotional. I long since got over that because I just had to come to the realization, if you're not going to fly your own flag, nobody's going to fly it for you. So the reality is, if you're not out there, you're not top of mind via content, people don't know. You could be the best at what you do in the entire world, but if people don't know you exist, they don't know you exist. And it's that simple. Gary Vee was the one
Distribution.
that got me to do this, because he said, he just kept saying over and over again repetitively, if you think you're a thought leader in your space, you can't make that call. You got to put your thoughts out into the world, and the market will make that call about whether you're a thought leader or not. You don't get to call yourself a thought leader. Only the market can call you a thought leader. And he kept saying, put your thoughts out there in the world and let the market decide. And I just got so sick of hearing that. I was like, okay, Gary, okay, I'm gonna start putting my thoughts out there. And it's been a journey of content creation ever since, and I've loved it.
Cool. Yeah, there's no stealth like thought leadership. There's no stealth product development these days. If you're doing something for real, you need to be out in the open and being challenged.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now, as we do come down to the end of our time together, this is where I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you. I get to let you ask me one question, any question you like. It can be personal or professional. Mr. Robby Bryant from Marigold. I'll say from Campaign Monitor because that's your special focus. So from Campaign Monitor, what is your question for me today?
Well, I'd like to tie in because you're a self-pronounced extrovert. So I want to tie back to the last question, or like the last topic that we were talking about, and talking about fixing the industry or maybe changing things a little bit about it. Obviously, you've got major players losing maybe 5, 10,000 sessions per month from these organic changes that are happening.
Yeah.
You're happy to fly your own flag. What are some ways that you are actively counteracting this loss of traffic, which you're assuredly suffering from?
Yes.
And you're not replacing one-to-one, but where are you finding your most scalable solutions of replacement?
It's getting more breadth and depth into my content. And by that, I mean being in more places simultaneously with more depth. And so, for example, when I started to see the writing on the wall with these large language models, I had never worried about Reddit before, for example. Never. I'd never participated in Reddit. I'd never joined Reddit. I never was a member of any subs. I didn't own my own subs. I just had nothing to do with Reddit. But I saw that a lot of the results that were being recommended to me as in ChatGPT and other large language models was data and information and quotes from Reddit. And I was like, maybe I should try this Reddit thing, because it seems that if I'm not present in Reddit, that's a bad thing, because it's clearly relying on Reddit for a lot of the authority weightings that it's giving individuals. Oh, and by the way, I need to double and triple and quadruple down on YouTube, because I clearly am seeing data being pulled from YouTube transcripts that is not in the title or the meta description of the video, but it's content that's being pulled from the actual content of the video itself. And clearly it's getting that from YouTube transcripts. And clearly I need to be doing a lot more on YouTube as a result. So those two recognitions, just based on my own interaction with those answer engines, told me, geez, okay, you now need to be in more places than you used to be. And you now need to be producing content at scale specifically for those channels. And if you're not, you're missing a massive opportunity here. Plus, you need to add more content about yourself on your own website. So on my Greenwood Consulting website, I created a completely standalone bio page with a whole bunch of information about me, like in granular detail, what events I've attended, webinars, links to podcasts I've been on, just like listing every single one of those instances with a date stamp and putting it in there and saying, look, okay, if this is what ChatGPT interprets as authoritative, meaning the more instances of it can find of me around the internet on more platforms going back as far as possible, if that's how it's going to weight, if it has to break a tie between me and another person and it can find out more about me than it can them, then bloody hell, I'm going to give it more. And that seems to have been effective so far. Now, I don't know if it will always be effective, because obviously, just like the SEO game, it can be gamed. But I feel like it's going to be hard for someone that didn't start creating content a decade ago like me to catch up. It's going to be real hard. But I can't stop. I have to keep going. And because if all of a sudden ChatGPT can't find anything referencing me, let's say I stop today, and a year from now, it can't find anything online referencing any new content or any new information or any new thought leadership from me, then it's probably going to downgrade me as an authority. It's going to say, he's dropped out of the industry. He's no longer the special sauce anymore. This new person who's been creating information over the last 12 months, they're the new hot thing, right? So I think there's a balance there of longevity in the system, but also breadth in the system. It seems to be weighting both.
Absolutely. It is a quality content battle royale
Yes.
at this point. And given the work you've done over the years, you're well positioned for it. Be easy on us, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you. Listen, this has been amazing. I'll drop a link to your LinkedIn profile and a link to the Marigold website into the show notes. But other than that, if people want to get a hold of you and discuss all things life cycle, not lifestyle. Wow, that was a Freudian slip.
We can do marketing.
Life cycle marketing. What is the best way for people to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn is probably super easy, but if you don't like LinkedIn or you don't have it, Robby.Bryant@campaignmonitor.com. Just hit me up.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a fantastic, stimulating conversation. I can't wait to speak to you again soon. Thank you so much. Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.